So when you hear a big company claim they're going green, what does that actually mean? How do they measure their impact on the climate? Well, it's not just a bunch of guesswork. There's a global rulebook for this. And today, we're going to break down exactly how it works. We're demystifying the language of the corporate carbon footprint.
This, right here, this simple idea is the whole reason we're even talking about this. For a company to take any real climate action, for investors to make smart decisions, you've got to have a clear, factual starting point. Without being able to measure your impact, trying to reduce it is really just a shot in the dark.
So think about it like this. To navigate the incredibly complex world of a company's environmental impact, you need a map. A map that shows you exactly where the problems are, how big they are, and who's responsible for them.
And that map has a name: the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. This is the global standard, the set of rules that everyone follows for carbon accounting. It makes sure that a company in Tokyo is speaking the same language as one in Toronto. The GHG Protocol basically came about because a bunch of major environmental and business groups realized everyone was doing their own thing, and we needed one single harmonized approach. Its whole purpose is to create what they call a true and fair account of emissions. And to do that, it breaks down a company's huge, messy impact into three neat, manageable categories called scopes. So let's start with the most direct parts of this map, the emissions that are happening right in a company's own backyard. This is where we find scopes 1 and 2.
And to make this super simple, we're going to use a fantastic little shorthand for the three scopes: what you burn, what you buy, and everything that's beyond. Trust me, it's a great way to keep it all straight.
Okay, first up is scope 1, what you burn. These are the emissions coming directly from assets the company owns or controls. So think about the fuel being burned in a fleet of delivery trucks, or the natural gas that's heating the office building. It also includes these things called fugitive emissions, which are basically just accidental leaks from stuff like air conditioning units. It's the most direct and obvious category.
Next is scope 2, what you buy. Look, most companies don't have their own power plant, right? They buy their electricity from a utility. Well, scope 2 accounts for the emissions that were created at that power plant to generate the energy the company uses. So even though the pollution isn't happening on their property, it's a direct result of their energy use. It's the carbon footprint of just keeping the lights on.
All right, so we've covered what a company burns and what it buys, but that's just the beginning. Now we have to look at the biggest, the messiest, the most complicated piece of the puzzle, the great beyond. This is scope 3. So you might be thinking, okay, after we measure all the direct emissions and the energy we buy, we've got a pretty good handle on things, right? Well, the truth is, for most companies, you've only seen a tiny fraction of the real story. Get this, for many of the world's biggest companies, the vast majority of their climate impact is hidden somewhere else. Take Kraft Foods. When they did their analysis, they found that over 90% of their total emissions weren't in scopes 1 or 2 at all. They were buried deep inside their supply chain.
And that brings us to the big one, scope 3, everything beyond. This category covers all the other indirect emissions that happen in a company's value chain. That means the entire network of suppliers providing materials, the distributors moving things around, and even the customers using the final product. It's a huge, sprawling category that looks both upstream and downstream from the company itself.
And here, you can really see just how massive Scope 3 is. It includes the carbon footprint of all the raw materials a company buys. It includes the emissions from every business flight an executive takes, the daily commute of every single employee, and even what happens to a product after it's sold, all the way to when it's thrown away. You can see why this is where the real challenge is.
Now, as you can imagine, mapping all of these interconnected emissions creates a huge challenge. How do you make sure the numbers are accurate and that you're not counting the same pollution multiple times? Double counting is a massive pitfall. It's what happens when the same emission gets claimed by more than one company. For example, my Scope 3 emissions from taking a business flight are the airline Scope 1 emissions. See the overlap? If we don't get this right, we end up with an inflated, totally unreliable picture of emissions, which just destroys trust in the whole system.
And the complexity isn't just in Scope 3. For Scope 2, the electricity you buy, there are actually two different ways to count it. The first is the location-based method. This basically reflects the average carbon intensity of the entire local power grid you're plugged into. But the second way, the market-based method, lets a company account for specific energy contracts they have, like if they've paid extra to buy power directly from a wind farm. So why have two different methods?
Well, the GHG Protocol actually requires companies to report both numbers in many cases. And the reason is, it gives you a much fuller picture. It shows the reality of the grid they rely on day to day, but it also shows the impact of the specific clean energy choices they're making. The key to all of this is just being transparent and consistent.
So, we've mapped a company's negative impact, but what about its positive contribution? That's where this whole conversation is heading next, with a really interesting emerging concept called Scope 4.
Scope 4 introduces this brand new idea of avoided emissions. It's not about measuring what happened, but what didn't happen, all thanks to a company's product or service. It completely shifts the focus from just counting up climate harm to also accounting for climate benefit.
And it makes perfect sense when you think about it. Every electric car on the road is helping its driver avoid gasoline emissions. Every Zoom call can replace a flight, avoiding all the emissions from that air travel. These are the real, measurable reductions that Scope 4 is trying to capture, that positive ripple effect of a product out in the world.
Now, it is really important to know that Scope 4 isn't part of the official GHG Protocol standard, at least not yet. The methods for calculating it are still being worked out. But you're already seeing a lot of innovative companies starting to report it anyway, because it helps them show how their actual business is contributing to a low-carbon future. So, this whole journey from Scope 1 to Scope 4 leaves us with a really powerful thought to chew on. What if the goal of all this accounting wasn't just to shrink a company's negative footprint, but also to grow its positive handprint on the world? Thinking about that, well, that could change everything.